Welcome to Taking Stock. I'm Amanda Lang. Coming up on the show, an innovation in home building aimed at doing more with less. And how critical are critical minerals? We'll dig in. Plus, unlocking the value of thousands of entrepreneurs. That's all ahead. First, for the week that was in business, it's time for the briefs. Leaders of the G7 will meet in Alberta this weekend, along with other invited heads of state. Canada is host to the meeting, where issues of security, trade relationships, and digital regulation are all on the agenda. With U.S. President Trump in attendance, it's a sure thing that tariffs will also be on the table. Canada will ramp up its defense spending to 2% of GDP by the end of this year. An aggressive target, Prime Minister Carney says, will also be designed to benefit Canadians, with a greater share of spending done domestically. It comes as NATO is expected to up the quota to 3.5% of GDP. Canada's purchase of F-35 fighter jets will cost 50% more than expected, according to the Auditor General. In total, the 88 stealth fighters could cost $33 billion if Canada carries through on the plan for all of them. The Prime Minister has ordered a review of the purchase in light of the current relationship with the U.S. government. The World Bank became the latest body to slash its outlook for global growth, now seen at 2.3% this year as tariffs and general uncertainty weigh on most economies. The global body lowered its forecast for 70% of the globe's economies, including the U.S., China, and Europe. The U.S. and China did reach an agreement to stand down on some of the more contentious aspects of their trade fight. That includes the release of rare earth minerals by China and renewal of visas to Chinese students attending U.S. colleges. The two will work on a more complete agreement they hope to finalize by August. Current U.S. tariffs on Chinese products stand at 30%, while China has 10% levies in place on U.S. goods. The Competition Bureau is suing food delivery firm DoorDash in Canada for allegedly using drip pricing to mislead customers about the total cost of a transaction. DoorDash denied the charge and said it will defend itself. It's the second drip pricing case brought since new legislation empowered the Bureau, the first being Cineplex, which was fined $38.9 million. It is appealing that ruling. The number of Canadians traveling south of the border continues to fall. StatsCan said return trips by air were down 24% in May compared to a year ago, while return trips from overseas rose 9.8%. Trips to the U.S. by car fell even further, down 38% in May, the fifth month of declines. And those are your business briefs. The race to build new homes is always hobbled by how they're built, labor-intensive and one at a time. Now, Mattamy Homes is backing Stellomar Advanced Manufacturing. It will make prefab components for up to 3,000 housing units a year. Peter Haas is general manager of Stellomar. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
So the idea here, of course, is to do things in a factory rather than one by one. What's your goal with this?
Our goal is to help solve the Canadian housing crisis. So building something in a factory and building a home in the factory, or portions of a home in a factory, allow us to build it significantly quicker with a higher quality product. So ultimately, consumers should have a better end product and at a lower cost.
And as I understand it, you will start by targeting a certain type of multi-unit dwelling condos. What's the thinking there rather than sort of the single-family home?
Yeah, our thinking is that it's really the missing middle right now. So we are looking at doing a 6-story building that's predominantly focused on families, so 2 and 3 bedroom units, and they'd be bigger than what is typically built today. Right now, if you look at most condos, they're smaller 1-unit buildings, and they're not very livable, they're not very usable. We're looking to do the opposite of that. We want people to live in units that they're proud to live in and want to be there for a long time.
Peter, doing prefab for housing in general seems like an obvious solution, and it's a kind of a missing component in improving the productivity of the sector. Why hasn't it been done before? Why isn't this something we're already doing?
Because it's hard. It takes significant investment. It takes having a land bank and actually being able to produce and having a customer who's willing to take what the factory can produce, because there's a lot of fixed costs associated with it. And that's ultimately the benefit of us partnering with Mattamy and having them as the lead investor and lead customer from it. So it gives us a real advantage in the market compared to others.
There is, of course, a capital-intensive piece to this, getting the manufacturing part of it up and rolling. Will that make it more expensive in the beginning and then with costs tapering off over time? How does that look as you look down the road?
Yeah, that's not the intention. The intention is that we're doing the investment. We know we're going to have to do that upfront investment. And then we don't plan on passing on the upfront costs. We're going to amortize them over time. But ultimately, as we kind of manufacture them for a longer period of time, we expect to become more efficient. So hopefully we'll be able to pass those costs on over time as well.
And can we assume, if this is a model that you get up and running and that it works, that you will go to other types of construction? I mean, what's the limit on what you could do in a prefab manufacturing way?
We're looking at everything. We're starting with the 6-story condo building. We're looking at low rise. We're looking at kind of attached product. Our intention is to take it as far as we can.
And in terms of ever getting to that single family home, Mattamy, obviously one of the biggest home builders in the country, if not the biggest. Is this a kind of a thinking they are likely to incorporate into their work?
100%. We're having those conversations now, and there's not necessarily volumetric modular, but you can do kind of pre-made walls and floors, and that's likely where we'll end up starting with them on that side.
So how soon until you actually have a building that we can say was made with prefab materials?
Factory is going to be up and running next year, so we'll be producing at some point next year, and then they'll be out in the world for people to visit soon after that. And
can you give us a sense, a ballpark of how the costs compare this to sort of more traditional construction?
Yeah, so if you look at some of the numbers that the President or Prime Minister Carney has said, he said that 20% less cost, 50% more speed, and we think we can achieve those or more. Peter, so good to have you with us. Appreciate your time today. Appreciate you having me. Thank you. Peter Haas is General Manager of Stellomar Manufacturing. Coming up, the feds have big plans for critical minerals in Canada. Getting there can also help meet our climate goals. Stay with us. Welcome back. The race is on to extract critical minerals in Canada. Here's what you need to know. The feds have identified 6 critical minerals to focus on that Canada is rich in: cobalt, copper, lithium, nickel, graphite, and rare earth elements. All are essential for greener energy technology, including solar, electric vehicles, charging stations, and batteries of all types. It's estimated that demand for critical minerals will jump 2,100% by 2050 and require up to $750 billion globally to produce it. Canada has some natural advantages. We already produce copper and nickel, and we have well-regulated resource and finance sectors to develop the minerals. And there's huge opportunity. It's estimated that of the $103 billion of copper reserves, we produce just 6.2%. Of the $120 billion worth of lithium, just 0.6% has been produced. Graphite and cobalt are similarly largely in the ground. Critical minerals represent a huge export opportunity, with demand approaching $800 billion by 2040 for 5 key minerals in Canada's top export markets. Price volatility is one big risk in the sector, with lithium and nickel particularly volatile. The second big risk for investors historically has been regulatory hurdles. Given the size of the opportunity, seizing the moment for critical minerals feels more important than ever. But is there a right way and a wrong way to go about it? Marisa Beck is Clean Growth Director at the Canadian Climate Institute. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
And a lot of that data comes from your own research and a report to government. What's the headline message that you would say about these minerals? We know they're important for a transitioning economy, but can we also do it in a way that is respectful of our net zero goals?
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, our report, which is titled Critical Path, Securing Canada's Position in the Global Critical Minerals Race, addresses exactly those questions. Critical minerals represent a multi-billion-dollar economic opportunity for Canada and the opportunity to build Canada's energy security at home. As you mentioned, Canada has ample reserves of those 6 priority critical minerals, and those minerals really form the building blocks of many clean energy technologies that the world will need a lot more of as we're moving through the clean energy transition. So what our research looked at is how Canada can seize this massive economic opportunity ahead, and the policies that Canadian governments should implement to make sure that these projects attract the private investment that they need, that they are being developed fast, and that they're being developed with the participation of indigenous communities and with the local support of communities as well.
Yeah, and the recommendations, of course, everybody sort of understands the urgency. The government's made it clear they want to move fast. They want to have, one regulatory authority. They want to have, one window kind of thing. What some of your recommendations are: don't relax your environmental standards. Stay true to those. Don't relax your commitment to Indigenous people. Can we square doing those things with speed? Can we do those things as fast as everybody wants to get them done?
Absolutely. I think so. So what we focused on was identifying the different success factors that make a successful critical mineral mining project. And as you mentioned, for example, Indigenous participation and Indigenous consent is a key factor here. And so are environmental standards and environmental protection. We want to make sure that there is acceptance and buy-in from local communities, from the Canadian public in developing these projects. We want to make sure that Indigenous communities have the opportunity to exercise their rights to self-determination and to fully participate in the economic benefits of these projects. Overall, these measures will help building successful projects that have an easy time going through regulatory approval processes and that can be developed fast and operate without disruptions.
Just briefly here, I mean, obviously the Climate Institute is interested in meeting our net zero goals. This government will also, of course, double down on some more traditional energy sources, not just those focused on new, cleaner technology. Do you think that is a loss to our advancement of greener technologies, that we will still focus on some more traditional resources?
Well, we were happy to see that critical minerals might be in that list of nation-building projects. And we were also happy to see that the criteria for these projects include a clear reference to clean growth, to Indigenous participation, and of course to the projects that have the most likelihood of success. And again, in the critical mineral space, those are the ones that meet the conditions of strong Indigenous participation and high environmental protection, high environmental standards.
So good to have you, Marisa. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
Marisa Beck is Clean Growth Director at the Canadian Climate Institute. Canadian businesses are facing a wave of retirements in the years ahead. Now, a partnership between BDC and First Nations Bank of Canada will facilitate the purchase of some of those businesses by Indigenous peoples. It's a $100 million initiative that will foster wealth creation and create opportunity for thousands of business owners. Bill Lomax, the CEO of First Nations Bank of Canada. Thanks for being with us.
Happy to be here.
The thing I loved about the story, Bill, is this is a huge and pressing problem. There's this massive transfer of wealth that has to happen, including for those business owners. They need buyers so that they can retire. How did you come to this idea of matching that need, backed by capital, with entrepreneurs in Indigenous communities?
We've been working with BDC for a while, and we have been trying to find more innovative ways to get capital out to First Nations. And this one just really made sense to me. When we see all of these retiring businesses, folks retiring from their businesses, this is a great opportunity for Canadians broadly. But I think First Nations and Inuit and Métis communities have an advantage here. In particular, they have the population to help run these businesses. We have a declining population here of young people in Canada broadly, which we've been supplementing with immigration, and that's fine. But the Indigenous community actually has a much higher young population than the rest of the community. So this is just a good match in the sense that you have folks that are wanting to retire from their business, and we can bring in the human capital to help run it.
So my understanding is that you think the average size of transaction might be around $5 million. I assume there will be a range, but that'll mean there's a lot of them ahead of you. What's the kind of plan of attack for managing the process here?
Yeah, so look, I think there's a lot of excitement from the Indigenous community for this program. We will have a lot of applications coming in very shortly. And I think it's just a matter of matching up with Indigenous communities that have found good opportunities and more often than not, those are going to be local for them. Maybe they'll find a plumbing business, or they'll want to buy a hotel, or they'll want to buy some kind of operating tourism business in the area where folks are looking to retire and want to see that business stay community centered. A lot of times people put their heart and soul into these businesses, and they don't want to see it go to some group that's maybe outside the region. And so I think this is, again, a strategic advantage for the nations in that they will be operating these locally, likely to keep all of the management in place and supplement it with their own folks to help run the business. So I think we'll get a lot of applications from communities all across the country over the next little while.
And over the next while, we just announced this, but how quickly do you think we start to see, there's a kind of a natural attrition rate of how these businesses become available, but will this actually maybe start creating transaction flow?
There's always some transaction flow. We already have people talking to us about businesses that they think could fit under this program. And so I don't know that this will force folks into wanting to retire, but for those who are ready to do so and to hand their business off to somebody else, this program is ready and waiting to move forward. So I do think we will likely see an arc, because a little bit of that hockey stick up as we go along, because we have to get out to the indigenous communities and market this program, let them know that it's available so that they can start to look at what's happening in their area. So I would say probably the next 6 months, we'll see a lot.
So good to have you, Bill. Appreciate your time today.
Great to talk to you.
Bill Lomax is CEO of First Nations Bank of Canada. Coming up, the new government is already speeding up decisions that had been in limbo, but at what cost? That's still ahead. But first, brand extension is getting new meaning and a bit of a stretch as the hosts of the popular Smartless podcast launched their own wireless brand. Smartless Mobile is backed by the three hosts, Will Arnett, Sean Hayes, and Jason Bateman, who are flush from a deal with SiriusXM, reportedly worth $100 million. Though Arnett is Canadian, the service won't be available here. But you do have to wonder about the erosion of goodwill the trio may face. We're thinking there's a big difference between someone entertaining us and sending us a bill. We're back after this. Bold moves on defense spending and promises to act fast on federal projects are evidence the government is willing to put its money where its mouth is, but where will the money come from? Paul Kershaw is founder of Generation Squeeze. Thanks for being with us.
My pleasure.
So we had deficits in this country before we upped our defense spending in a dramatic way. It's not really a subject of conversation. We're not in an election, so I don't know who will complain about it, if anybody. But this will, of course, grow our deficits even further. How concerned should we be?
I think we need to be concerned. I think we need a serious conversation about revenue in this country because, our most recent information is from the fall economic statement a year ago, which showed we had a $42 billion deficit. Now it's going to be above 60 with the Liberal platform, and I'm not sure entirely the degree to which the most recent announcement, the NATO commitment, will drive it still further. It is fine to say we want to make investments and run deficits for capital investments. There's good reason to do that. But we are running large operating deficits. That's been what our problem has been for years. And the problem really still comes down to a failure decades ago to plan for the healthy retirements of our aging loved ones, the boomers in our lives. And if we don't have a serious conversation right now about what's driving those operating deficits, it makes it so much harder to find the cash we need to invest to meet our defense ambitions and to invest to meet the infrastructure goals we have for building Canada's one economy instead of 13 provincial economies.
So, there would be purists, Paul, who will say, and those of us who lived through the 90s might find ourselves in this category, a surplus is what we should be looking for. Run balance, and if you can't run balance, have more. However, the change you're talking about, where the government will account differently for operations from capital, is that going to should it affect how we talk about a percentage of GDP? Because right now we allow them to say it's a percentage of GDP because some of this is investment in our growth. We can grow our way out of debt, right? We're making investments in things that will pay off. Once we put that in its own bucket called capital, should we have an absolutely balanced operating budget?
And a balanced operating budget, and to the degree that you're talking about, a surplus when we're not in a recession. And I think that the key issue that we need to recognize is that as we have an aging population, inevitably that will have a dampening influence on our growth. And we just have to account for that, which is all the more reason why we need a commission, we need a task force to actually talk about revenue and get beyond the kind of magical thinking that's evolved into our elections, where we as voters say, please promise me new spending and tax cuts simultaneously. Yes, yes, some tax cuts can spur more productivity and some revenue improvements as a result. But we are dreaming in Technicolor if we think that we can close the gap between our spending on an aging population now, which matters. This is my mom we're talking about. But it is leaving very, very large deficits. Like at the federal level, the current federal deficit can be accounted for entirely by increase in old age security. In the Ontario budget, its deficit can be accounted for entirely by the increase on spending on medical care for those over 65. That conversation needs to come to light in our society if we want money left over to invest in other priorities like national defense, like housing, like economic growth, like AI.
We don't have a ton of time here. You cover this. You talk a lot about it. What's the best way to get people focused on that? Old people react to this because they feel like, look, we are entitled to this stuff. Don't take it away. How do you get young people paying more attention to it?
Well, in Australia, they have generational accounting reports every 4 years that the government does. The EU has a commissioner for intergenerational fairness. Wales has an act for well-being for future generations. Canada badly needs those kinds of government infrastructure to, bring this conversation to light and to actually showcase to our aging loved ones that the entitlements they're talking about that they are deserving of, we want them to have good care, but they are not things they fully prepaid for. And that's a conversation that needs to come to light if we're going to have any money left over to meet other national objectives. Thanks for being here, Paul. Always appreciate it. Pleasure. Paul Kershaw is founder of Generation Squeeze. Time for the takeaway and punching way outside our weight class. As the G7 gets underway in Kananaskis, Alberta this weekend, it's worth remembering that Canada is somewhat lucky to have a seat at this table. Other world leaders gather under the G7 banner, so it's possible we get an invite, even if we weren't part of the core team. That we were originally invited to join by U.S. President Gerald Ford is a telling reminder of how our proximity to and relationship with a mighty U.S. has shaped the world's understanding of Canada. But it's never been only about that. From our contribution to 2 world wars to the creation of global peacekeeping, Canada has been engaged in the world with the mentality of a heavyweight, even if we've always been middleweight. And more so than ever, it's important for Canada and its government to behave in that globally focused fashion. As the United States pulls back on foreign aid and investments, Canada could double down, filling a void and not only solving humanitarian crises, but also playing the role we've historically played of a balanced, measured approach, but one rooted firmly in the shared values of our allies. It's what earned us a right at the table, and with the largest players on the world stage acting in a spirit of isolation, Canada has an opportunity to be expansive. Yes, we're small, although with one of the top 10 largest economies in the globe, not that small, and we can have outsized influence and lead by example. With a government that is very much focused on moving fast on projects in Canada's self-interest, the list of those items can include actions beyond our borders. We may not be able to replace every dollar spent by the U.S., but we can make an impact in the world and do it in ways that serve the interests of our partners. Sometimes those interests may not have obvious or immediate domestic payoffs, but that they exist in this interconnected world where relationships create influence is still very much true. My takeaway: Canada has a role to play in the new world order, and sometimes you have to do the work to keep your spot in the ring. That's Taking Stock for this week. I'm Amanda Lang. Thanks for being with us.